here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about the behavior of organisms, all right? And in biology, we look at the behavior of all sorts of organisms from like the smallest single-celled bacteria all the way up to complex multicellular organisms like us. And one of the things that's really interesting is when we think about behavior, when we think about the behavior of an organism, the more simple the organism is, the easier it is to figure out the behavior. So for example, there are marine organisms that photosynthesize, and they exhibit what's called chemotropism. And what that means is they can move towards or away from chemicals. And so they can, for example, if there is a place where there's a higher concentration of carbon dioxide, which is necessary for photosynthesis, some of these organisms can move toward that carbon dioxide. They can also be phototropic, which means they can move toward, or some organisms can move away from sunlight. When you're talking about a single-celled photosynthetic protist, like a little dinoflagellate, it's just this tiny little thing, individual, single-celled organism that floats around in the ocean, it's pretty easy for us to think about that behavior as occurring only because of chemical reactions. Why? It doesn't have a brain. It has no way of thinking. It has no way of processing. What those organisms do is entirely controlled by chemicals, chemicals in or around them. So, for example, organisms that can move toward a chemical are able to, because they have receptor chemicals embedded in their cell membranes, embedded in their cellular structures, they are able to detect that there's a higher concentration of a chemical on one side of them and a lower concentration on the other side. And that is not something they think about because they don't have a brain. It takes billions and billions of neurons to make a brain. They have only one cell and it's not a neuron. So how does that work? Well, it's just a chemical reaction. Like whatever is in the water over here reacts with the side of the organism that's closest to that. Whatever's in the water over here reacts with chemicals in the side of the organism that's closer to that. On the inside of the organism, whatever happens as a result of those chemical reactions causes chemically motion. So the organism might have a little tail, and some combination of a high amount of chemical over here and a low amount of chemical over here makes the tail wiggle, and then the organism moves in this direction. That's how it processes. That's how it detects chemicals, or organisms can detect light. There's no thought. Many of you are aware that certain plants can turn their leaves towards sunlight. It happens all the time, phototropism. But that is not something that plants think about, and you all know why. Plants don't have a brain. They're complex, multicellular organisms, but they're brainless. They have no neurons, they have no nervous system. They cannot think. Can't ask a plant why it's doing what it's doing. Can't explain it because it has no brain to think about it. It's entirely chemical reactions. What's interesting about advanced organisms is it turns out their behavior can sort of be boiled down to chemical reactions as well. It gets more and more complicated, the more complex the organism, and it almost completely breaks down when we talk about people. Here's an example. I had to take my oldest son to an appointment today. He had to see the orthodontist. And on the way back, we were on the corner of Walnut and 9th Street. And there were two young people. They looked like middle schoolers. And it was in the middle of third period at Shelblin. And I looked at my son, who's in 8th grade at Shelblin, and I'm like, you know those kids? And he said, nope. And I said, well, I bet you they're 8th graders. And they're skipping. They just left the school, and now they're walking to McDonald's for lunch. And my son was mystified by that. Just like, what? And I was like, he's like, I don't even know them. And I said, yeah, you know why you don't know them? And he said, thought for a second, he goes, because they're never at school. I was like, yeah. And so what's interesting in this classroom is that there are some of you who even now, after like a year of maturity beyond 8th grade, are hearing me say that, and you're like, wow, they didn't even, they're just like skipping, like they didn't, like some of you are functioning in the same little world that my older son is functioning in, which is right now a world that just doesn't even, is not even aware that there are people that are doing that. There are others of you in this room, and I mean no disrespect by this, but there are people in this room who engage in that kind of behavior yourselves. I know that. Like reasonably intelligent person. I know what goes on. I know that 8th graders and 7th graders and even younger are getting into behaviors, they're using substances, they're doing all sorts of things that aren't great. And what is really super interesting about it is why. Why is it that we do things that we know aren't smart? You all are smart enough to know, go to class, don't skip, don't use drugs, like don't get involved with people who are using drugs. You all know that, but if you haven't already felt the pull, you will at some point, because what's gonna happen is you can be in a situation, maybe you'll know people, maybe you won't, maybe you'll be people that you like hang out with on a regular basis, maybe it'll be like just random whatever, and you will feel this like, this something. And that something that you're feeling is chemical in nature. And it's triggered by biology. It's triggered by evolution. What most evolutionary biologists think is that the degree to which human beings take risks and do stupid things is driven by evolution. Largely by the evolution of attracting a mate. So you step back in time 200,000 years ago, and people weren't like dressing cool or like learning how to play an instrument or people, nobody thought about what brought two individuals together to reproduce. But it turns out that one of the really strong signals of reproductive fitness is the degree to which you're tough. That's not just a male thing either, or a female thing. It's like, it's totally agender, right? But it turns out that if you are somebody who is tough, other individuals will look at you, and they look at you and they think to themselves, that's somebody who would have tough kids. So what does that mean? Well, so that means that if you're a lion or a bear or a early hominid, like a pre-human mammal, that's a good thing. Tough kids are good, right? Like they're more likely to be able to endure. Risk-taking is a sign of toughness. Now, the problem with human society now is that because of our social evolution, because of our technological evolution, the risks that we take, the decisions that we make that are risky are way more risky than they used to be. It used to be that if you like went out a little bit further in the wilderness to hunt or collect food, that was risky. That was risky enough. It used to be that if you could cross the stream when it was running pretty high to get to some rich resource on the other side, food or other material, that was risky and that was pretty tough and that was impressive. And actually there was an evolutionary advantage to it, because if you could do that and survive, and you pass that ability on to your kids, then they could survive too. We evolved to be tougher, in part because of our risk-taking behavior. And the problem is that all gets blown up when we have risks that are disproportionate to the rewards, right? There's no survival advantage to most of the foolish decisions that we make. And so things have backslid, but the point is we all still have those evolutionary incentives. We all feel it. And to keep things, relatively PG rated, like you all have seen people do stupid stuff and kind of admired it, right? Like if nothing else, you've watched people do silly little pranks on YouTube or TikTok. And it's kind of fun and kind of cool when you think about what's going on there. And what's going on there is they're taking a risk, they're taking a social risk. And we admire that. That's just how we're built. One of the things that drives me crazy most crazy of anything is I'm friends with, so this is Corvallis, right? So you all know what people in Corvallis tend to be like, and I'm friends with a bunch of typical Corvallis people. One of the typical Corvallis things is to be really into like adventure. So you're like, you know, like people like mountain biking and whitewater rafting and you know, rock climbing and stuff like that. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is how many of the people that I know who are really smart, who are really careful, who make really good decisions for themselves, really enjoy watching people free climb. You know what free climbing is? What is it? Yeah.
Sort of like rock climbing,
It
except
is
there's
rock climbing.
no harness. You are not
Yeah.
attached to anything.
Yeah, so, I mean, what's the advantage of free climbing? Right? It's all chemical. There is no, like, it doesn't help you rock climb, it doesn't help you be a better rock climber. Why is it more fun for some people? It's more fun because when you do it, your brain releases chemicals, and those chemicals that your brain releases make you feel pretty good. And that's like something that I know a lot of people who are like, wow, that person free climbed, you know, Half Dome in Yosemite, that's so awesome. And I think to myself, wow, that's so dumb. It's so dumb, people die. So, there, I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever because I find it super interesting. My point is this: think about the things that you do. Think about what you're doing, why you're doing them, because it can make a huge difference to you, to your life. I hope nobody in here ever gets into free climbing, but one of the things that I notice in my classroom is things like, well, where you sit. So is that big of a deal? Probably not. But I do know, like, again, I'm a really old person. I was a student once, and then I was still a student for a long time, and then I was a teacher, and I've been a teacher for a long time. And I know that one of the reasons that people like to sit back there is because the further away you are from me, the more you think you can get away with. And here's the crazy thing about it, is you're sort of right. You're right in the sense that if you're back there and you're on your phone or you're, you know, dinking around on your Chromebook, and I kind of don't spot it or I don't deal with it, then you've gotten away with it. But you're not getting away with it in the sense that I'm utterly blind to the fact that it's going on. Of course I know it's happening. Part of what happens is I want you all to be able to make some decisions on your own. But part of what ends up happening is that it ends up resulting in changes being made by me. Like, you can't sit back there, and nobody likes that. So my point is, in this classroom, if what you're doing is an attempt to get out of thinking about biology, to get out of doing work that's related to biology, then, like, if you're aware of that, you might make a better decision. And as I said on Tuesday, I'm worried about some people in the class. I'm worried, those of you who came from Mr. Barron's class, and I don't know, I'm worried about some of you. I'm worried about some of the students I worked with last semester. And the reason for that is because this class should be easy to get a C in if you want to. Super easy. All you have to do, show up on time most of the time, right? Like, if you're mostly here, you're mostly on time, that's a huge first step. Number two, think about the stuff that we're doing. Think about biology. Try to find interesting things. If I give you something to do, engage, like actually think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's interesting, and try to learn, and then give me some evidence of what you've learned. Mr. Barron's class functioned essentially the same way. What that means is, if you got a D or an F in either one of our classes, what you're telling me is somewhere in those three things, you dropped the ball. You either couldn't be here on time, which is like a big deal, or you couldn't be here at all, which is a big deal. You were not engaged for at least a reasonable amount of time during class, which again, that's a big deal. If you can't sit and work and think for, you know, an hour and 20 minutes or 15 minutes, like, that is a huge red flag about what you're, like, the kinds of struggles that you might meet in your life down the road. And if you can't, like, provide somebody with something that they're asking, some sort of a product that they're asking for. Same deal. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. It doesn't matter whether you get a job or whether you're going to be independently wealthy. Your success in life is largely going to be tied to those three things. It's true for everybody. It's true for every job. It's true for every relationship. It's true for every hobby. Those three things are the three things that matter. And so my goal this semester is to make sure that we are locked into that. That's why I'm making such a huge deal out of it. I mentioned on Tuesday that I'm going to give you like about 10 days to get stuff sorted out. And I am really serious about that. Those of you who cannot get sorted out to the point where I feel like you're going to get at least a C in this class, I'm going to have you elsewhere, not because I don't want you here. I actually would love all of you to stay here. But because if you're not going to get at least a C, you're wasting your time. A D in biology is an admission that you really don't care. And an F is something that almost takes effort. If you got an F, you almost had to try to not try, if that makes any sense. So be aware, those two grades aren't acceptable in this classroom. They're not. And it's in other classrooms it might be, right? If you put, me into a nuclear physics class at OSU right now, I might work my tail off and get a D or an F, because they don't grade based on effort, but I do. So I'm gonna give you a C. If you're here, on time, engage in the material, and you turn stuff in, I'll give you a C. So if you don't get a C, that's because you are dropping the ball to a degree that you are past that now. You are all past that. You're ready to be done with that nonsense. So that's super important, and we're gonna get it sorted out by the end of next week. Nobody's gonna get a D or an F in this class. And the reason is because anybody who doesn't show me that they're willing to do those three things is gonna be gone at the end of next week. Okay, so just be like 100% aware of that. And